He was the kind of man who could silence a saloon with a single step, wealthy, dangerous, and colder than a Montana winter. Colton Mercer didn't need love. He needed a signature on a marriage license to save his empire. He offered a desperate woman a fortune to wear his ring move into his ranch and play the part of a devoted wife. There was just one condition, written in ink and sealed with a glare. Do not fall in love with me. This is business. It was the perfect plan, until a single forbidden kiss burned the contract to ash. The heat in the town of Dry Creek wasn't just coming from the relentless sun beating down on the wooden boardwalks. It was rising from the sheer desperation clinging to Jessica Hart's skin. She stood behind the counter of Miller's General Store, her hands raw from scrubbing the floorboards earlier that morning. At 23, Jessica had the tired eyes of a woman who had lived 3 lifetimes. Her father's gambling debts had been buried with him. But the collectors didn't care about gravestones. They cared about gold. And the man coming to collect next week, a grotesque cattle broker named Silas. No, not Silas. That name was too common. Named Barnaby Rooker would take her family's small homestead if she didn't come up with $500. She might as well have tried to lasso the moon. The bell above the door chimed, not with a friendly tinkle, but with a forceful rattle. The atmosphere in the store shifted instantly. The idle chatter of 2 farmers near the feed bags died out. Mrs. Higgins, usually a gossip of the highest order, clamped her mouth shut. Colton Mercer walked in. He was a giant of a man, broad-shouldered and dressed in a suit that cost more than the entire building. His black Stetson cast a shadow over eyes the color of hardened steel. He didn't look like a cowboy. He looked like a king who had decided to walk among the peasants just to remind them who owned the ground beneath their feet. He owned the Double M Ranch, the largest stretch of fertile land in the territory, and rumor had it he had more money in the bank than the governor. He also had a reputation. Cold. Ruthless. A man who treated people like chess pieces. Jessica straightened her spine, wiping her hands on her apron. "Good afternoon, Mr. Mercer. How can I help you?" Colton didn't answer immediately. He walked to the counter, his spurs jingling with a soft, ominous rhythm. He took off his gloves, slapping them gently against his palm. He looked around the store with a critical sneer before his gaze landed on Jessica. He didn't look at her like a man admiring a woman. He looked at her like a man inspecting a horse for purchase. "You're Tom Hart's daughter," he stated. His voice was a deep rumble vibrating in Jessica's chest. "I am," Jessica said, lifting her chin. She refused to cower, even though her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "If you're looking for my father, he passed 3 months ago." "I know," Colton said. "I also know Barnaby Rooker is coming for your land on Friday." Jessica's blood ran cold. "That's private business. In this town, debt is public knowledge." "Miss Hart," Colton said, leaning in. He smelled of expensive tobacco leather and something sharp like pine. "I have a proposition for you." Jessica laughed, a brittle, harsh sound. "I'm not that kind of woman, Mr. Mercer. If you're looking for company, try the saloon." Colton's eyes narrowed, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "I'm not looking for a mistress. I'm looking for a wife." The silence in the room was deafening. Even the flies seemed to stop buzzing. "Excuse me," Jessica whispered. "My father's will has a clause." Colton said, his voice lowering, so only she could hear. "I don't get full control of the railway shares until I'm married. The board of directors is freezing my assets until I present a bride. They think I'm too volatile to run the company alone. They want to see a family man." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He slid it across the scarred wooden counter. I don't have time to court a socialite from Boston. I don't have the patience for romance. I need a woman who is desperate, pragmatic, and local. I need a woman who needs money more than she needs a fairy tale. Jessica looked down at the paper. It was a contract. 1 year, Colton said. You marry me. You live at the Double M. You play the role of the doting wife in public. In private, you stay out of my way. In exchange, I pay off Rooker, I save your father's homestead, and I give you $5,000 when the year is up. $5,000. It was a fortune. It was freedom. And the catch? Jessica asked, her voice trembling. There's always a catch with men like you. Colton's expression hardened. The catch is the rule. We share a house, but we do not share a bed. You do not ask me about my business. You do not nag me. And above all, he leaned closer, his steel-grey eyes boring into hers. You do not fall in love with me. This is a transaction. If you get sentimental, the deal is off, and you leave with nothing. Jessica looked at him. He was handsome, devastatingly so, but he was a wall of stone. Falling in love with him seemed as likely as falling in love with a loaded shotgun. I can promise you, Mr. Mercer, Jessica said, grabbing a pen from the jar. That will be the easiest part of the deal. She signed her name. Jessica Hart. Colton took the paper back, inspecting the signature. Good. Pack your things. The preacher is waiting. The ceremony was a blur. It took place in the dusty back room of Judge Pembroke's office, with only the judge's clerk and a drunk piano player as witnesses. Jessica wore her Sunday best, a simple blue calico dress that was frayed at the hem. Colton wore his suit. He didn't hold her hand. He didn't smile. When the judge said, "You may kiss the bride," Colton merely leaned in and pressed his lips to her forehead. It was dry, quick, and completely devoid of warmth. "Let's go," he said, turning on his heel, before the judge had even finished signing the certificate. The ride to the Double M ranch was 2 hours of silence. Jessica sat stiffly in the carriage, watching the landscape change. They left the dusty plains of Dry Creek and ascended into the foothills. The grass became greener, the trees taller. The Double M wasn't just a ranch, it was a kingdom. The main house was a sprawling 3-story mansion made of timber and stone, with a wraparound porch that overlooked a valley filled with cattle. As the carriage pulled up, a storm was brewing over the mountains. Dark purple clouds swirled, mirroring the knot of anxiety in Jessica's stomach. A woman was waiting on the porch. She was older, with severe grey hair, pulled back into a tight bun, and a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite. "This is Mrs. Galloway," Colton said, as he helped Jessica down, his grip firm but impersonal. "She runs the household. She knows the arrangement." Mrs. Galloway looked Jessica up and down, her lip curling slightly. "She's thin, Mr. Mercer, and her dress is practically rags." "She's my wife now, Mrs. Galloway," Colton said sharply. "See that she gets everything she needs. Put her in the blue room." "The blue room?" Jessica asked, trying to keep up. Is that near your room?" Colton stopped on the stairs and turned to look at her. The wind whipped his coat around his legs. "My room is in the east wing. The blue room is in the west wing. As I said, Jessica, may I call you Jessica now we lead separate lives?" He didn't wait for an answer. He stormed into the house, barking orders at a stable hand named Rusty to take care of the horses. Jessica was left standing on the porch, the first drops of rain beginning to fall. She felt less like a bride and more like a new piece of furniture that had just been delivered. Mrs. Galloway ushered her inside. The interior of the house was magnificent, filled with mahogany furniture, velvet drapes and crystal chandeliers. But it was cold. There were no flowers, no personal touches. It felt like a museum. "Dinner is at 7 sharp," Mrs. Galloway said, leading Jessica up the grand staircase. "Mr. Mercer does not like to be kept waiting, and he does not like chatter during meals. He reads his correspondence." "Does he ever smile?" Jessica asked, unable to help herself. Mrs. Galloway stopped and looked back. "Mr. Mercer hasn't smiled since the fire that took his brother 5 years ago. You'd do well to remember that. You aren't here to fix him, girl. You're here to sign papers." Jessica was shown to her room. It was beautiful, with a 4-poster bed and a view of the mountains. A trunk of the new clothes sat at the foot of the bed, dresses of silk and satin in deep greens and burgundies. Colton had evidently prepared for this. He had bought her a wardrobe before he had even bought her cooperation. She changed into a dark green gown that fit surprisingly well. She looked at herself in the mirror. She looked like a lady. She looked like the wife of the richest man in Montana. But her eyes were still the eyes of Jessica Hart, the girl who scraped pennies to buy flour. At 7 o'clock, she went downstairs to the dining room. The table was long enough to seat 20 people. Colton sat at one end. Her place setting was set at the other 10 feet away. He was reading a telegram. He didn't look up when she entered. "Sit," he commanded. Jessica sat. The soup was served in santuo. The clinking of spoons was the only sound. "So," Jessica said, her voice echoing in the large room, "what do I do all day if I'm not to disturb you?" Colton lowered the paper slowly. His eyes traveled over her new dress, lingering for a fraction of a second on the way the green silk complemented her pale skin and auburn hair. He quickly looked away, picking up his wine glass. "You spend money," he said. "You go into town. You let people see you. You attend church on Sunday. You make the town believe that Colton Mercer has a heart. Next week is the Founders' Ball. We will attend together. You will dance with me. You will smile. And if anyone asks, you will tell them we have been courting in secret for 6 months. Lying comes easy to you, doesn't it?" Jessica challenged. Colton slammed his glass down. The red wine sloshed over the rim. "Survival comes easy to me, Jessica. Do not mistake the two. I am protecting my legacy. You are protecting your father's dirt farm. We are both liars tonight." He stood up, tossing his napkin on the table. "I'll be in my study. Do not disturb me." He walked out, leaving Jessica alone with the cold soup and the vast, empty silence of her new life. She looked at the ring on her finger, a heavy diamond that sparkled in the candlelight. It felt heavier than a shackle. But later that night, as a thunderstorm raged outside, shaking the window panes Jessica heard pacing in the hallway, she cracked her door open just an inch. She saw Colton standing by the window at the end of the hall, staring out into the dark, rain-lashed night. He had a glass of whiskey in one hand, and his other hand was pressed against the glass. His shoulders were slumped, the posture of a man carrying the weight of the world. For a moment, the king of the cattlemen looked incredibly lonely. Jessica almost stepped out, almost went to ask him if he was all right. But then she remembered the rule. This is business. She closed the door, softly locking it. She had survived poverty. She could survive a cold marriage. Or so she thought. The night of the Founders' Ball arrived, bringing with it a tension that was tighter than the corset Jessica was forced to wear. She stood in front of the full-length mirror in the blue room. The dress Colton had selected was a deep, shimmering midnight blue velvet, trimmed with silver lace that caught the light like sauce. It was cut lower in the bodice than anything she had ever worn and exposing the creamy slope of her neck and shoulders. She looked like a queen. She felt like a fraud. A sharp knock on the door made her jump. "Enter," she called out, smoothing the velvet over her hips. Colton walked in. He stopped dead in his tracks. For 3 days they had barely spoken. He had been a ghost in his own house, leaving before dawn and returning after she was asleep. But now, seeing her in the dress he had paid for the ghost, became very real. His gaze raked over her, dark and unreadable. He wore a tuxedo that accentuated the width of his shoulders, his black hair slicked back, revealing the sharp, rugged lines of his jaw. "You'll do," he said, his voice rougher than usual. He stepped forward, holding a small velvet box. "Turn around." Jessica obeyed, her heart thumping against her ribs. She felt his warm hands brush against the bare skin of her neck as he fastened a necklace. It was heavy. Cold diamonds and sapphires. "This belonged to my mother," he murmured, his breath hitching slightly near her ear. "Do not lose it." "I won't," Jessica whispered. The heat radiating from him was intoxicating. For a second he didn't pull away. He stood just behind her, his reflection towering over hers in the mirror. They looked like a power couple, invincible. "Remember the rules, Jessica," he said, his eyes meeting hers in the glass. "Tonight is a performance. Nothing more." He offered his arm, stiff and formal. The town hall had been transformed. Streamers hung from the rafters, and a live orchestra played a waltz. When Colton and Jessica Mercer walked through the double doors, the room went silent. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through wheat. "Is that the heart, girl? Look at those diamonds. I heard he paid off her father's debt." Colton's grip on her arm tightened. "Smile," he commanded through gritted teeth. "And look at me, like I hung the moon." Jessica turned her face to him, plastering a dazzling smile on her lips. "Like this, darling?" she asked, her voice dripping with sugary sarcasm. "Perfect," he muttered. They moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations. Colton was charming a side of him she hadn't seen. He shook hands, made jokes, and played the part of the happy groom. But Jessica could feel the tension in his muscles. He was scanning the room, waiting for something. It didn't take long. Well, if it isn't the happy couple. A man stepped out from the crowd, blocking their path. He was shorter than Colton, with a face that looked like it had been punched a few times, and a suit that was too flashy. Wesley Pike. He was the owner of the neighboring ranch and Colton's fiercest rival for the railroad contract. "Pike." Colton nodded, his tone dropping 20 degrees. "I didn't think you'd show your face after the bank rejected your loan application last week." Pike's face reddened. "My finances are fine, Mercer. I'm just surprised to see you here. And with a wife a bit sudden, isn't it? I heard you bought her off the clearance rack at the general store." A few people nearby gasped. Colton's jaw clenched, his fist balling at his side. He was about to snap. Jessica could feel the violence rolling off him in waves. If Colton punched Pike, the board of directors would hear about it. He would look unstable. He would lose the contract. Jessica laughed. It was a light musical sound that cut through the tension. She stepped forward, slipping her hand from Colton's arm to rest it possessively on his chest, right over his heart. "Oh, Mr. Pike," she said, her voice loud enough for the onlookers to hear. "You must be confused. Colton didn't find me at the store. He found me right where he left his heart years ago. We just finally decided to stop wasting time." She looked Pike up and down with a pitying smile. "But I understand why you're bitter. It must be hard to focus on business when you're so worried about other people's happiness. Perhaps that's why your cattle yield was down 40% this quarter, Pike sputtered. My yield is— Come along, darling, Jessica said, turning her back on Sync and pulling Colton with her. The music is starting, and I've been dying to dance with my husband. She dragged a stunned Colton onto the dance floor. As the waltz began, he placed his hand on her waist. Where did you hear about his cattle yield? Colton asked, staring down at her. There was a new light in his eyes. Respect. I read your ledgers in the library this morning, Jessica admitted. I was bored. You leave a lot of paper lying around. Colton didn't scold her. For the first time, the corner of his mouth quirked up. It wasn't a smile, but it was close. You're dangerous, Mrs. Mercer, he murmured. I'm expensive, Mr. Mercer, she countered. You get what you pay for. For the rest of the dance, he held her a little tighter than necessary. The space between them, mandated by his contract, seemed to shrink with every turn of the waltz. 3 days after the ball, the heat wave broke. The sky turned a bruised purple, and the wind began to howl through the valley, stripping the leaves from the cottonwood trees. A summer storm was rolling in fast and violent. Colton had been gone since dawn, inspecting the northern fence line. Jessica was alone in the massive house, pacing. The victory at the ball had shifted something between them. Colton wasn't as cold. He watched her when he thought she wasn't looking. But he was still distant, retreating to his study, every night locking the door against her. By afternoon, the rain was coming down in sheets. Rusty the stable hand burst into the kitchen, dripping wet. Mrs. Mercer. We got a problem. The bridge over Miller's Creek is washing out. The prize stallion, Titan, broke out of the paddock. He's headed for the gorge. Where is Colton? Jessica asked, panic rising in her throat. He's up on the ridge. He can't hear the bell. I can't go after the horse and secure the barn at the same time. Jessica didn't think. She acted. She had grown up on a farm. She could ride as well as any man in the territory. Secure the barn. Rusty, I'll get Titan. But ma'am, Mr. Mercer will skin me alive if— I'm his wife, not his prisoner. Go. Jessica ran out into the storm. She grabbed a slicker from the hook and mounted her mare, Shadow. The wind nearly tore her from the saddle as she galloped out of the yard. The rain was blinding. Mud splashed up, coating her dress and face. She rode hard toward the gorge, squinting through the deluge. She found Titan near the edge of the rising creek. The black stallion was spooked, rearing up as lightning cracked across the sky. Easy, easy, boy, Jessica screamed over the thunder. She dismounted her boots, sinking into the mud. She grabbed Titan's halter, trying to calm the massive beast. I've got at you. Suddenly the ground beneath her shifted. The creek bank was eroding. Jessica! A roar louder than the thunder tore through the air. She looked up to see Colton charging toward her on his horse, his face a mask of pure terror. He leaped from his saddle before his horse had even stopped sprinting toward her. Get away from the edge, he bellowed. He lunged for her, just as the mud gave way. Jessica screamed as she slipped, sliding toward the raging brown water. Colton's hand clamped around her wrist like an iron manacle. He dug his boots into the mud, groaning with exertion, and hauled her up. He pulled her hard, swinging her away from the water and crashing into the wet grass. They tumbled together, rolling through the mud until they came to a stop. Jessica was gasping for air, her hair plastered to her face. Colton was on top of her, pinning her to the ground to keep her from moving. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving against hers. His eyes were wide, the pupils blown. The rain washed over them, but Jessica could feel the heat of his body searing through her wet clothes. "Are you insane?" Colton roared, shaking her slightly. "You could have been killed." "What were you thinking? I was saving your damn horse," Jessica yelled back, shoving at his chest. "You care more about your assets than anything else, don't you? I thought you'd be happy." "Happy?" Colton's voice broke. He grabbed her face between his gloved hands, forcing her to look at him. "I watched my brother die in an accident like this. I am not going to watch you die too." The confession hung in the air, heavy and raw. Jessica froze. "Colton, I told you," he whispered, his voice dropping to a growl. "I told you this was business. I told you not to make me care." He looked at her lips. The raindrops were tracing the curve of her mouth. The contract was forgotten. The money was forgotten. The rules were incinerated by the lightning strike of adrenaline and fear. Colton lowered his head and crushed his lips against hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a collision. It was possessive, desperate, and angry. It tasted of rain and whiskey and repressed longing. Jessica gasped, opening to him, her hands tangling in his wet hair, pulling him closer. For a moment, the world narrowed down to just the two of them in the mud. He kissed her like he wanted to devour her. His hands sliding down her back, pressing her body against his. Jessica felt a fire ignite in her belly that terrified her. She wasn't pretending anymore. She was falling. Colton groaned a low sound in his throat and deepened the kiss, his tongue sweeping into her mouth, claiming her. Then, as abruptly as it began, he tore himself away. He pushed himself up, scrambling backward as if she had burned him. He stood up in the rain, his chest heaving, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. He looked down at her, his eyes wild with conflict. "That," he panted, "that was a mistake." Jessica pushed herself up on her elbows, shivering. "Colton!" "Get on your horse!" he commanded, his voice suddenly ice cold again. The walls were back up higher than before. "Go back to the house. Do not speak of this." He grabbed Titan's reins and mounted his own horse, refusing to look at her. "Colton, wait." But he didn't wait. He spurred his horse and galloped away into the storm, leaving Jessica sitting in the mud, her lips still burning from his kiss, and her heart cracking right down the center. She had broken the only rule, and God help her, she wanted to break it again. The silence that descended on the Double M Ranch was heavier than the storm that had just passed. For 3 days following the incident at the creek, Colton Mercer was a ghost. He left the house before the sun crested the mountains and returned only after the grandfather clock in the hallway chimed midnight. He didn't eat dinner at the long mahogany table. He didn't leave notes. Jessica moved through the house like a phantom, her skin still humming with the memory of his touch. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt the rain, the mud, and the crushing weight of his body against hers. She felt the desperate, hungry way he had kissed her. That wasn't business. That was raw, unfiltered need. She wanted to talk to him. She wanted to ask him why he had looked so terrified when she almost fell. Why he had kissed her like it was the last thing he would ever do, and why he was now punishing her for it. On the 4th evening, she couldn't take it anymore. She saw the light under his study door. Jessica didn't knock. She turned the handle and walked in. Colton was sitting behind his massive oak desk, surrounded by mountains of paperwork. He looked exhausted. There were dark circles under his eyes, and he hadn't shaved in 2 days, the stubble darkening his jaw. A glass of whiskey sat untouched near his hand. He looked up, his eyes narrowing instantly. "I didn't hear you knock." "I didn't knock," Jessica said, walking further into the room. She was wearing a simple cream-colored dress, her hair loose around her shoulders. "We need to talk Colton." "There is nothing to talk about," he said, returning his gaze to the ledger in front of him. "I'm busy. The railroad contract is in the final stages." "Stop it," Jessica snapped. She slammed her hand down on the desk right on top of his papers. "Stop pretending nothing happened. You kissed me." Colton froze. He slowly looked up at her hand, then to her face. His expression was a mask of granite. "I slipped," he said coldly. "Adrenaline. A moment of weakness. It won't happen again." "Weakness," Jessica repeated, her voice rising. "It didn't feel like weakness. It felt real. And for a moment I thought maybe you felt it too." Colton stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floorboards. He walked to the fireplace, turning his back to her. "What I feel is irrelevant, Jessica. Read the contract. Clause 4. No emotional entanglement. You are here to play a role. If you are confusing the performance with reality, then you are not as intelligent as I thought." His words were like a slap. Jessica recoiled, tears stinging her eyes. "Is that all I am to you?" she whispered. "An employee, a signature." Colton gripped the mantel of the fireplace, his knuckles turning white. "You are the woman who is going to get $5,000 to save her family's legacy. Isn't that enough? Don't ask for things I cannot give you. I am not a man capable of love. That part of me burned down a long time ago." He turned to face her, his eyes dead. "Go to bed, Jessica, and lock your door. I don't want to see you until breakfast." Jessica stared at him for a long moment, her heart breaking in her chest. Then she nodded slowly. "Fine. If you want business, Mr. Mercer, I'll give you business." She turned and walked out, slamming the door behind her. The next morning, Jessica ordered the carriage. She couldn't stay in the house. She needed air. She needed to escape the suffocating tension of the Double M. "Take me to town," she told Rusty. "I need to visit the general store." Dry Creek was bustling. The recent rains had made the roads muddy, but the mood was high. Jessica walked along the boardwalk, ignoring the whispers. She knew what they were saying, that she was the luckiest woman in the territory. If only they knew. She was exiting the milliner's shop when a voice called out to her. "Mrs. Mercer, or should I say the future ex-Mrs. Mercer." Jessica stopped and turned. It was Wesley Pike. He was leaning against a post, smoking a cigar, a nasty smirk plastered on his face. "Get out of my way, Mr. Pike," Jessica said, clutching her reticule. "I have no patience for you today." "Feisty," Pike chuckled, stepping closer. "Colton always did like breaking wild horses. But you know, I actually feel sorry for you, Jessica. You're walking around with your head held high, thinking you struck a deal with a businessman. You don't realize you made a deal with the devil." "My husband is a good man." Jessica lied, her chin tilting up. "Better than you." "Is he?" Pike took a drag of his cigar. "Did he tell you how he saved your father's farm? Did he tell you about the debt?" Jessica paused. "He paid off Barnaby Rooker. Everyone knows that." "Ah," Pike said, shaking his head. "See, that's the funny part. I did some digging. I wanted to know how Mercer got the upper hand so fast. It turns out Barnaby Rooker didn't own your father's debt last month." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded document. "Here, A copy of the bank transfer. Jessica hesitated, then snatched the paper. Her eyes scanned the lines. Transfer of debt, title. Thomas Hart Estate. Buyer, Colton Mercer. Date, 3 months ago. Jessica's breath hitched. 3 months ago, but my father was still alive then. Exactly. Pike smiled cruelly. Colton Mercer bought your father's debt while the old man was on his deathbed. He held on to it. He waited. He waited until your father died, and he waited until Rooker, who was acting on Mercer's orders, threatened you with foreclosure. He engineered your desperation, Jessica. He cornered you so you'd have no choice but to say yes to his little marriage proposal. The world spun. Colton hadn't just offered her a lifeline. He had pushed her into the water so he could be the one to pull her out. Why? Jessica whispered, her hands shaking. Because he needed a wife to get the railroad shares, Pike explained, enjoying every second of her pain. And he didn't want a wife who could fight back. He wanted someone he owned. He bought you Jessica, just like he buys cattle. Jessica crumpled the paper in her fist. A wave of nausea rolled over her. Every kindness, every shared dinner, even the rescue at the river, it was all tainted. It was all manipulation. Thank you, Mr. Pike, she said, her voice hollow. Don't thank me, Pike laughed. Just remember who your real friends are when you leave him. Jessica walked back to the carriage, her legs feeling like lead. Home, ma'am? Rusty asked. Yes, Jessica said, her eyes hardening into flint. Take me home. I have a contract to terminate. The sun was setting when Jessica burst into the ranch house. She didn't stop at the foyer. She marched straight up the stairs to the east wing, ignoring Mrs. Galloway's protests. She found Colton in his bedroom. He was changing for dinner, buttoning a fresh white shirt. He looked up, surprised by her sudden entrance. Jessica. What is the meaning of... Jessica threw the crumpled paper at his chest. It hit him and fell to the floor. Colton looked down at it, then back at her. His face didn't change. He didn't look guilty. He looked resigned. You knew, Jessica said, her voice trembling with rage. You owned the debt the whole time. You could have forgiven it while my father was alive. You could have saved him the stress that probably killed him, but you held it over our heads like an axe. Colton picked up the paper. Your father was a bad gambler, Jessica. Someone was going to buy that debt. It was better that it was me. Better, she screamed. You manipulated me. You waited until I was starving, until I was terrified, and then you swooped in like a savior. You trapped me. I made a business decision. Colton roared back, his composure finally cracking. I needed a wife, and I needed leverage. If I had just asked you to marry me, you would have said, no, you're too proud. I needed to ensure you would stay. So you bought me. Jessica stepped closer, tears streaming down her face. You think you can just buy people, Colton? Is that what that kiss was? Just you sampling the merchandise? Colton flinched. Jessica, stop. No. She ripped the diamond necklace from her neck, the one that had belonged to his mother, and threw it on the bed. I am done. You can keep your money. You can keep your ranch. And you can keep your damn railroad shares. I would rather be poor and free than live in a golden cage with a monster like you. You can't leave, Colton said, panic finally bleeding into his voice. He took a step toward her. The contract. To hell with the contract, Jessica spat. And to hell with you. She turned and ran. Jessica, Colton shouted, chasing after her. She flew down the stairs, her vision blurred by tears. She reached the heavy oak front door and threw it open. Outside, the twilight was deepening. But as she stepped onto the porch, a shot rang out. Bang! Wood splintered on the doorframe, inches from Jessica's head. She screamed and dropped to her knees. Colton dove, tackling her to the ground, shielding her body with his own. "Stay down!" he yelled, reaching for the revolver he kept in a holster by the door. Another shot whizzed past, shattering a window. "Mercer!" a voice boomed from the darkness of the yard. It wasn't Pike. It was a rougher, drunker voice. It was Barnaby Rooker, and he wasn't alone. "We know you're in there," Rooker shouted, "and we know the little lady is trying to run. But Pike says if she leaves, your contract is void. And if your contract is void, you lose the railroad. And if you lose the railroad, well then I guess this land is up for grabs." Colton cursed, checking the cylinder of his gun. He looked down at Jessica beneath him. His eyes were no longer cold. They were terrified, but not for himself. "Jessica," he whispered, his hand gripping her shoulder. "I need you to listen to me. I need you to trust me one last time." "Why should I?" she sobbed, shaking. "Because," Colton said, cocking the hammer of his gun, "I might be a monster, but I will die before I let them touch you." The foyer of the Mercer mansion exploded into chaos. "Get inside!" Colton roared, hauling Jessica to her feet and shoving her toward the heavy oak door of the library. Another bullet shattered the hallway mirror, sending shards of glass raining down like deadly confetti. Jessica scrambled on her hands and knees, her dress tearing at the hem. She could hear the distinct drunken laughter of Barnaby Rooker outside, mixed with the shouts of at least 4 other men. "Come on out, Mercer," Rooker yelled, his voice slurring. "Pike paid us a bonus for every bullet hole we put in your fancy house, and double if we put one in you." Colton slammed the library door shut and threw the deadbolt. He dragged a heavy mahogany desk across the floor, barricading the entrance. The room was dark, lit only by the flashes of lightning from the storm that was still grumbling in the distance, or perhaps it was just the thunder of Jessica's heart. "Stay down," Colton ordered. He moved with a terrifying efficiency. He went to the bookshelf, pulled a fake volume of an encyclopedia, and a panel in the wall slid open. Inside was an arsenal Winchester rifles, boxes of ammunition and hunting knives. Jessica watched him, trembling. "You keep guns in the wall." "I told you," Colton said, tossing her a small revolver. "I have enemies. Today you are one of them, but right now Rooker is the bigger problem. Do you know how to use this?" Jessica stared at the cold metal in her hands. "I grew up on a farm, Colton. I can shoot a coyote at 50 yards. "Good." His eyes met hers. They were dark, intense, and filled with a strange mixture of adrenaline and regret. "Aim for the legs if you can. But if they come through that door, shoot to kill. Do not hesitate. Rooker is not a man who believes in mercy." "Why are they doing this?" Jessica asked, her voice cracking. "Pike. Just for a contract." "Pike doesn't just want the contract," Colton said, loading a Winchester with a rhythmic clack-clack. "He wants to destroy the Mercer name. He knows if I die tonight, the railroad deal collapses. He picks up the pieces for pennies on the dollar. And Rooker is just a hired thug who holds a grudge because I embarrassed him." "Because you bought my debt," Jessica said bitterly. Colton paused. He looked at her, his face shadowed. "Yes, because of that." A glass window in the library shattered inward. A Molotov cocktail, a crude bottle stuffed with a kerosene-soaked rag, sailed into the room. It smashed against the velvet curtains, and flames erupted instantly, licking up the fabric like a hungry beast. Fire! Jessica screamed. Colton didn't panic. He grabbed a heavy rug from the floor and smothered the flames, stomping them out with his boots. But the smoke was already filling the room, stinging their eyes. "They're going to burn us out," Colton coughed. "We can't stay in here. What do we do?" Jessica cried, the heat rising. "I'm going to draw their fire," Colton said, moving to the side door that led to the garden. "I'll flank them from the stables. When you hear me shooting, you run for the cellar. Lock yourself in. Do not come out until you hear my voice, or Rusty's." "No." Jessica lunged forward, grabbing his arm. "You can't go out there alone. There are 5 of them." Jessica let go. "You'll die," she sobbed, the anger at his betrayal suddenly eclipsed by the terrifying realization that she didn't want him to die. "Don't you dare die on me after ruining my life." Colton looked down at her hand, gripping his sleeve. For a split second his mask crumbled. He reached up and cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing away a smudge of soot. "If I die," he said hoarsely, "you get the ranch. It's in the will. You'll be the richest woman in Montana. You'll be free." "I don't want the ranch," Jessica screamed. "I want—" She didn't get to finish. Another bottle smashed through the window, landing closer this time. The heat was becoming unbearable. "Go." Colton shoved her toward the hallway. "Now." He kicked the side door open and sprinted out into the night, his rifle raised. Jessica didn't go to the cellar. She couldn't. She crouched by the window, peering through the smoke. She saw Colton dive behind a stone fountain. Muzzle flashes lit up the dark yard. Bang, bang. One of the attackers fell. Rooker screamed a curse. "Get him." "He's by the fountain." Bullets chipped away the stone around Colton. He was pinned down. He returned fire, taking down another man, but he was outnumbered. Rooker was advancing with a shotgun. Jessica gripped the revolver Colton had given her. Her hands were shaking, but her vision was clear. She saw Rooker stepping out from behind a tree, raising his weapon, aiming at Colton's exposed flank. Colton didn't see him. "No," Jessica whispered. She stood up. She kicked the glass out of the broken window frame and rested her elbows on the sill. She took a breath, held it, and squeezed the trigger. Crack. The recoil jolted her shoulder. In the yard, Barnaby Rooker howled in pain and dropped his shotgun, clutching his shoulder. Colton whipped around, seeing Rooker fall, then looked back at the house. He saw Jessica in the window, smoke billowing around her, the gun in her hand. "Jessica, get down!" he roared. But the distraction was enough. The remaining 2 men, seeing their leader down and taking fire from 2 directions, panicked. They scrambled for their horses. "Let's ride, it ain't worth it," one of them shouted. They galloped off into the darkness, leaving Rooker moaning in the mud. Colton didn't chase them. He sprinted toward the house. But as he ran, Rooker, lying on the ground, reached for his pistol with his good hand. Jessica saw it. "Colton behind you." Colton spun, firing his rifle from the hip. Bang! Rooker slumped back, silent. But at the same moment, a smaller, sharper sound cut through the air. Colton jerked violently, as if he had been punched by an invisible giant. He stumbled, took 2 more steps, and then collapsed onto the wet grass. "Colton!" Jessica vaulted out of the window, ignoring the drop. She hit the ground and scrambled toward him. He was lying on his back, staring up at the stormy sky. A dark stain was spreading rapidly across the white shirt he had put on for dinner. It was just above his hip. "Colton." Jessica fell to her knees, pressing her hands against the wound. The blood was hot and sticky. "Colton, look at me." His eyes fluttered open. They were hazy. He looked at her, and a faint, bloody smile touched his lips. "You," he wheezed, "you're a terrible shot. You missed his leg." "Shut up," Jessica sobbed, pressing harder. "Rusty misses Galloway." "Help!" Rusty came running from the stables with a lantern, his face pale. "Mr. Mercer! Oh, God, is he—" "He's alive," Jessica snapped, her voice turning into steel. "Help me carry him inside. Put him on the dining table. Mrs. Galloway, boil water, and get the whiskey. Now." The next 6 hours were a blur of blood, steam, and terror. The nearest doctor was in Dry Creek, 2 hours away, and the roads were washed out. Jessica was on her own. She cut the shirt off Colton's body. The bullet had passed through, missing the major organs, but nicking an artery. The bleeding was profuse. Jessica had to reach into her memories of helping her father with injured livestock memories she had tried to suppress. She cleaned the wound with whiskey. Colton groaned, his body arching off the table in unconscious agony. "Hold him down, Rusty," Jessica commanded, her hands steady, despite the tears blurring her vision. She threaded a needle with silk thread from her sewing kit. "I have to stitch it." She worked by the light of 10 oil lamps. Every puncture of the needle felt like she was sewing her own skin. Colton mumbled deliriously, thrashing against Rusty's grip. Don't let them take her," he murmured. "My fault, all my fault." "Shh, I'm here," Jessica whispered, tying off the final stitch. "It's over, Colton. You're safe." They moved him to the sofa in the parlor near the fire. Mrs. Galloway, usually so stern, was weeping silently in the corner. Jessica sent her to bed. She sent Rusty to guard the door. She sat alone with him. For 2 days the fever raged. Colton burned with heat. Jessica didn't sleep. She sat by his side, wiping his forehead with cool cloths, dripping water into his mouth. On the second night, the fever broke. Jessica was dozing in the armchair when she heard a raspy voice. "Jessica." She jerked awake. Colton was watching her. He looked gaunt, pale, and incredibly weak, but his eyes were clear. "You're awake," she breathed, rushing to his side. She put her hand on his forehead. It was cool. "Thank God." Colton flinched at her touch, but he didn't pull away. "You stayed," he whispered. "After everything I did, you stayed." "You took a bullet for me," Jessica said softly. "I figure that cancels out some of the debt." Colton closed his eyes, a look of profound shame crossing his face. "It doesn't. Pike was right. I manipulated you." "Why?" Jessica asked. She needed to know. "You have all the money in the world. You could have had any woman. Why did you go to such lengths to trap me?" Colton turned his head to look at the fire. "Do you remember the county fair 4 years ago?" Jessica frowned. "The fair, I was there with my father. I was selling jams." "I was there," Colton said. "I had just buried my brother. I was in a dark place. I was planning on drinking myself to death that year. I walked past your stall. You were arguing with a man who tried to shortchange you. You were so fierce, so proud. You had flour on your cheek." He looked back at her. "You laughed at something your father said. It was the first time I had felt anything other than grief in months. I watched you for years, Jessica. From a distance. I knew I couldn't approach you. I'm not a good man. I'm hard. I'm broken. And you were light." Jessica stared at him, stunned. "You knew me? When I heard Rooker was moving on your father's debt," Colton continued, his voice straining, "I knew what he would do. Rooker has a reputation with women who owe him money. I couldn't let him near you, so I bought the debt. I told myself it was just business. I told myself I needed a wife for the railroad. But he reached out his hand, trembling, and took her fingers. The truth is, Jessica, I created the contract because it was the only way I could think of to keep you close without terrifying you with the truth. I made the rule do not fall in love because I knew if you ever saw the real me, the man who manipulates and schemes, you would leave. And I couldn't bear the thought of you loving me and then stopping. Jessica sat in silence, processing his words. The monster wasn't a monster. He was a man paralyzed by his own self-loathing, a man who had used his power to protect her, the only way he knew how, by controlling the situation. "You are an idiot, Colton Mercer," she whispered, tears spilling over. Colton let out a dry, painful chuckle. "I know. You could have just asked me to dance," she said, squeezing his hand. "I don't dance," he replied, "unless it's for a contract." Jessica leaned down. She brushed the hair back from his damp forehead. "The contract is void," she said. "Pike burned the copy in the library, I'm sure." Colton's face fell. "Then you're free. I'll wire the money to your account in the morning. You can go." Jessica looked at him. She looked at the man who had shielded her from bullets, the man who had watched her from afar, for years, the man who had bought her debt to save her from a predator. "I'm not going anywhere," she said firmly. "Jessica, you don't have to." "I'm renegotiating," she interrupted. "New terms, no more secrets, no more separate bedrooms. And if you ever try to control me again, I will shoot you myself. And I won't aim for the leg." Colton looked at her, hope dawning in his eyes for the first time. "Those are steep terms. Take it or leave it, Cowboy." Colton smiled, a real smile. It transformed his face, taking 10 years off his age. "Deal." He pulled her down, ignoring the pain in his side, and kissed her. It was gentle this time. It was a promise. Recovery transformed the Double M Ranch. It was no longer a cold museum, but a home filled with warmth. However, the peace was shattered when Sheriff Brady rode up with grim news. "We found Rooker's body," the sheriff told them, hat in hand. "But the only witness who could tie Wesley Pike to the attack had a convenient accident in his cell this morning. Pike is cleaning house." Colton gripped the arms of his chair, his face pale but furious. "He gets away with it." "Worse," the sheriff sighed. "Pike has petitioned the railroad board. He claims you're physically incapacitated and your marriage is a fraud. He's demanding the contract be revoked at the town meeting tomorrow." Colton tried to stand, wincing as his stitches pulled. "I'll kill him." "No," Jessica said, pushing him gently back down. Her eyes flashed with a dangerous intelligence. "You can't fight him with guns right now, Colton. But if he wants to put our marriage on trial, let's give him a show. Sheriff, tell Pike we'll be there." The town hall was packed, the air thick with judgment. Wesley Pike stood before the 5 grim-faced members of the railroad board, preening like a rooster. "Colton Mercer is a violent relic," Pike declared, gesturing to the crowd. "And this wife, a desperate store clerk coerced into a sham union. The man is unstable and the contract should be mine." The double doors banged open. "I don't look coerced, do I, Mr. Pike?" Jessica strode in, wearing a sharp riding habit that commanded respect. Beside her, Colton leaned heavily on a cane, his movements stiff, but his glare lethal. The crowd parted instantly. "Mrs. Mercer," Pike sneered. "Did he force you to come here to save his fortune?" Jessica ignored him, walking straight to the board table. "My husband is recovering from a bullet meant for me," she announced, her voice ringing clear. Fired by bandits paid for by a competitor. Lies and hearsay, Pike shouted. Is it? Jessica reached into her bag and slammed a small, dirty black book onto the table. Barnaby Rooker was a meticulous man. He kept a ledger of all his jobs. Page 14. Payment for arson and assassination. Signed by Wesley Pike. The room went deathly silent. Pike turned the color of ash. The chairman adjusted his spectacles, read the page, and looked up with a scowl. Sheriff, arrest this man for conspiracy to commit murder. As Pike was dragged away screaming threats, the chairman extended his hand to Colton. Mr. Mercer, the contract is yours, provided, of course, that your union is stable. Colton didn't look at the board. He dropped his cane, ignoring the pain in his side, and pulled Jessica into his arms. My union, he rumbled loud enough for the whole town to hear, is the only thing that matters. He kissed her deep, possessive and real. The crowd erupted in cheers. Jessica pulled back, breathless and smiling. I told you I was expensive, Mr. Mercer. Colton grinned, his eyes full of light. Worth every penny. From a cold contract signed in a dusty store to a love forged in fire and blood, Jessica and Colton Mercer proved that even the hardest hearts can be broken open by the right person. They didn't just build a railroad. They built a legacy that would last for generations. Sometimes the greatest risks aren't in business. They're in letting yourself be loved. If you enjoyed this story of twists, romance, and Western justice, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to hit the bell icon so you never miss a new story. What would you have done in Jessica's shoes? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.